I'm Sabrina. I'm Sabrina Zeif, and menopause is really something that's very close to my heart. I'm a nutritional therapist, but I've actually spent many years also in the pharma industry. I'm going to drop straight into my talk, which is menopause. What is it, and how does it affect women? So, what is menopause? So, menopause is a natural stage of life for women, usually in the late 40s, early 50s. It can also happen earlier or it could happen later. And this is due to fluctuating hormones, primarily estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Now, perimenopause usually begins several years before menopause. In fact, it's a newly coined term because when I was actually going through menopause, I didn't even know that word existed. Anyway, it is the time when the ovaries begin to make less estrogen. So usually perimenopause starts in women around their mid-40s. Average length is about 4 to 5 years. But this could be shorter, but it could also be longer. For some women, it can be 10 years. Now, perimenopause ends when a woman has gone 12 months without having had a period. So from that day onwards, a woman is now in menopause. And the average age of menopause in the UK is around 51. So menopause really is like it's one day, theoretically speaking. And from that day onwards, you're actually postmenopausal, which is the rest of your life after menopause. Early menopause is something which happens when a woman's periods stop, say, before the age of 45. And if a woman is under 45 and have noticed periods becoming infrequent or stopping altogether, it's really important to speak to your doctor. 1 in 100 women, so that's about 1% of women, actually experience menopause before the age of 40. So here's an interesting fact. During Victorian times, the average menopause age was 57, and the average age at death was 59. Now, that might have been an old woman thing then, but certainly it is not now. Because on average, women now spend 1/3 of their life postmenopausal. So perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms already affect a substantial number of workers. And that number is expected to grow considerably with more older workers forecast to stay in work or go back to work. So let's look at some statistics of menopause and women in the workplace. Women are working later in life than ever before, with an estimated 4.3 million women over the age of 50 currently employed in the UK. And that's making up about half of the UK's labour force. Many women are going through menopause during their working lives, and menopause remains an overlooked issue in many organisations. So it's really great to see this initiative by Shropshire Partners in Care. I'd say well done. Other statistics, there are just under 1 million women working in the NHS. I think it's about 960,000. 80% of menopausal women work. 75% of menopausal women experience some kind of symptoms. And from research, it showed 63% of women say that their work and life quality is negatively impacted. In fact, 1 in 3 women in the workforce will soon be over 50, bearing in mind that the retirement age is 68. So let's look at some symptoms. It's been reported to be around 34 symptoms of menopause, but actually I recently saw a doctor post online, they're up to 50. Now, don't get scared. Women have estrogen receptors throughout our bodies. We've got it not just in our reproductive organs, we've got it in our brain, in our heart, muscles, skins, it's everywhere. So when the levels of estrogen, as well as things like progesterone and testosterone, start to fluctuate during perimenopause and fall, this can trigger changes throughout our entire bodies. So things like hot flushes, night sweats, weight gain, which is probably one of the things you guys know the most, which most people know as the classic symptoms. However, the hormonal roller coaster that can throw up so many surprising symptoms. So if we look at some of the things I've listed here, you know, brain fog, mood swings. 1 minute you're in a good mood, next minute you're not. Fatigue. Have you ever felt that all of a sudden in the afternoon you just want to sleep, or you feel totally exhausted? Never suffered from anxiety, suddenly you're feeling anxious. Depression, irritability, well, flying off the handle with a partner, the family, at work. Memory problems, suddenly you forgot where you parked the car. Low motivation, can't be asked. Difficulty concentrating. Well, sometimes, have you ever read something and you had to read it 5 times before it even sinks in? Migraines and headaches. If you've had migraines previously or headaches, they can get worse, or you can actually start experiencing them. I actually used to suffer from migraines. I always thought they were due to stress. And in fact, I ended up with 6 weeks of having had migraines and in the hospital for an MRI, which, you know, turns out it was not anything to do with my head. Anyway, other things, low sex drive, can't be asked, vaginal dryness, irregular periods. That's if you're not on the pill, it's a good indicator that you're might be perimenopausal, but there could be other things too. Hair loss, anybody notice? Dry skin, itchiness, altered sense of smell, facial hair. Goodness, do we really need that? Gum problems, dry mouth, brittle nails, change in body odors. Anybody notice that? I mean, I've had it and I was like, that could not possibly be me. Digestive problems, bloating, flatulence, urination problems, urinary pain, incontinence, muscle stiffness, joint pain, osteoporosis. Okay, I'm not going to go and say any more. You know, these are lists of symptoms not meant to scare you, but it's to raise the awareness so that women know, one, you're not going crazy, right? Every woman's experience is different. Some experience more physical symptoms, others experience more psychological symptoms, whereas some experience both, and some just slide through with a few symptoms or none. But 3 out of 4 women, 75% of women, experience some kind of symptoms. The psychological ones can really sneak up on you. And this is what women talk about. Now, as hormone levels change, it can be common for some symptoms to come and go. Estrogen fluctuates throughout perimenopause, so it does like this, whereas progesterone just gradually declines. So again, change in periods can be a first sign of perimenopause. Contributing factors to the severity of symptoms could be diet, lifestyle, overall health. So symptoms often change with time. So sometimes it's difficult to know which symptoms are due to change in hormone levels or whether they're just related to life in general. But something to be aware of is that declining hormone levels can impact on gut, liver, bone, heart, and brain health. In fact, it is well documented that low levels of estrogen increases the risk of heart disease and dementia. Oops, sorry. So let's talk a little bit about stress. Well, what does stress have to do with menopause? Well, actually, when we experience stress, the body becomes primed for attack, and the adrenal glands choose to produce cortisol and adrenaline. And these are your stress hormones, and they produce those over the production of estrogen and progesterone. Well, that's bad news, especially for menopausal women, because we need these hormones for our health and emotional well-being. So chronic stress, which is sustained stress, when our body is in fight or flight mode, it doesn't function optimally. And sustained stress can result in things like nutritional deficiencies because we're so stressed, our body's not absorbing the nutrients it needs. We can gain weight. Stress actually can mimic the symptoms of menopause. Something to look out for. Brain fog gets worse, anxiety, and stress really can affect our digestive health as well. And we know our gut health is like our second brain. So it's important to note that many current menopausal women belong to what we call the sandwich generation. Teenagers or kids in university, aging parents, we're working and you're dealing with the pandemic at the same time. It's not easy. Women are used to balancing and juggling many plates at home and at work. But the thing is, menopause and stress challenges these abilities. So a few top stress reducing tips could be: learn to say no. Clear, unwanted, don't want to do things in your diary. Surround yourself with people who make you feel good, not people who drain you. Slow down, switch off, and don't feel guilty. You got to make some downtime, and that's got to be non-negotiable, even if it's like 5 minutes a day, just your time. Spend more time outdoors. The pandemic has allowed a lot of us to be able to get outdoors more, walk at lunchtime, listen to podcasts, but fresh air really helps. Prioritize sleep. Sleep is a real issue when it comes to stress and how you function at work. So, go to bed without the gadgets, ditch the iPad, phone, laptop, whatever, and have a wind down routine. You got to make sure, another thing is there are boundaries between work and home. If you work from home, you got to do like me, shut the door. Yeah, and sometimes have a digital detox. You got to listen to your body. Deep breathing when you're stressed. Try some yoga. I mean, you don't have to go to yoga class. You can do a lot of things online. Taking a break helps us to switch off our overactive stress response. Sometimes you got to walk away. So lifestyle changes can help to manage stress. So you got to learning some relaxation and breathing skills are useful. And reducing distress by targeting unhelpful thoughts and behaviors, because sometimes we just go into overdrive and we just go nutty. You just got to shut that down sometimes, and you've got to find ways to address sleep. So let's look at how does menopause affect women in the workplace. So there are challenges. A 2017 government commission review into the effects of menopausal symptoms on women's working lives found that unlike pregnancy or maternity, the menopause is not well understood or provided for in a workplace culture, policies, or training. In fact, the review also found that the attitudes of some managers and work colleagues towards menopausal women, and these are midlife women in general, they showed a lack of knowledge, understanding, support, indicating widespread gendered ageism. Now, it now shows that 1 in 7 women have considered giving up work due to menopausal symptoms. And it should be considered like pregnancy. The menopause is an occupational health issue. Research also shows that the more troublesome the menopausal symptoms are, the less engaged women feel at work, they have lower levels of commitment, and a great intention to quit their jobs altogether. And studies also show that menopause symptoms can have a significant impact on attendance and performance. Loss of confidence can really make a woman doubt her capabilities. Some women can be misdiagnosed as suffering from mental ill health or other conditions, and detrimental impact symptoms can wrongly be seen as a performance issue when it's not. Now, it doesn't have to be this way. In recent years, many organizations are finally wising up to the fact that it pays to be a menopause-friendly environment. So when menopause in the workplace is handled correctly and sensitively, it helps to reduce absenteeism. It allows a woman to talk more openly about their concerns with colleagues and managers. The thing is, menopause is a completely normal life event. It's not an illness, and it's not a medical condition. The symptoms of menopause, particularly the psychological ones, are all too often under-recognized, undervalued, and not taken seriously enough. And women find that the challenges faced with these psychological symptoms were the ones that were most bothersome, or the one that would most affect them at work and even at home. So we're talking about things like memory loss, anxiety, confidence, lack of concentration. Now, some women go through menopause with little impact on their daily lives. Others experience symptoms that last for several years and have negative impact on their performance and attendance and work. And the other thing is these psychological effects can also impact on relations, whether it's at home or at work. For example, a bad night's sleep can affect concentration, while heavy periods or hot flushes can be physically distressing and embarrassing. Some women suffer from mental health conditions such as stress, anxiety, depression. And for some, the symptoms are so severe that women are forced to leave their jobs altogether. Now, menopause is a transition. So it's key for women to realize you are not losing the plot, though you feel as though you are. So it's a transition that happens over many years. So when it's recognized, there is something that you can do about it. Menopause doesn't just affect half of us, it affects all of us, colleagues, family, friends, partners. And it's very likely that early diagnosis, education, and adjustments can act as a preventative measure for menopause-related sickness. When menopause is managed correctly, not only can it reduce absenteeism, for example, reasonable adjustments are put in place, it enables women to talk about their concerns with colleagues and managers. So there should be measures in place to provide some support in what is considered a significant physical change, well, in line with puberty or pregnancy. So I want to do a quick overview about the management of menopause as it stands now. So if menopausal symptoms are affecting you, and I've just given you a description of a lot of the symptoms that you might be experiencing, you should actually go see a doctor or a healthcare professional, and especially one who has an interest in menopause or who is the women's health GP. They're able to tell if you're in perimenopause or menopause based on age, symptoms, how often you have periods, etc. Now, getting the right menopausal treatment can often mean the difference between a miserable menopause or a healthy, manageable one. I'd like to talk a little bit about HRT, hormone replacement therapy. It is the most effective for menopause, and it can have a dramatic effect on symptoms. Yet, frustratingly, so many struggle on needlessly for years. And this has a lot to do with the fact that the confusion over the safety of HRT and scaremongering headlines and unhelpful myths have made many women weary of HRT. There's increasing evidence now that the earlier HRT started, the more it protects you from osteoporosis and cardiovascular disease. That's all I'm going to say about HRT for just now. There are other things such as complementary and alternative medicines not available on the NHS, things like St. John's wort, black cohosh, isoflavones. I would caution that you use these things based on advice from a qualified complementary therapist and not just self-medicate. Diet and nutrition, can it make a huge difference in menopause? Absolutely. That's actually my specialty, and I'll touch a little bit on that afterwards. Lifestyle. Exercise is so important during perimenopause and menopause for bone health, muscles, cardiovascular health, mood changes, and it helps to maintain healthy weight. So this includes some strength training exercises. So where do you start? If you don't exercise, start from somewhere. If you go to the grocery store and you only park by them, as close as possible, park as far away as possible. Whatever you can do to make you do a little bit more. If you're at a desk all day long, get up every hour, get fresh air, take a lunch break, do more. Try the couch to 5K. I've got a friend who's doing that and she's absolutely loving it. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a talking therapy, and for some women this is quite useful. Other things could be menopause proof your bedroom. But what time I mean of that, make bedtime consistent, have comfortable sheets, natural fabrics to sleep in, have a fan, get rid of all the banned screen time before bed, have a bedtime routine. Something like alternative nostril breathing has been commonly used after yoga practices, and this helps to bring an inner calm, so you can try that as a nighttime routine, but some kind of nighttime routine helps. So can diet and lifestyle make a difference? Like I said, absolutely. But there's no one size fits all way of eating during, before, or after menopause. What's key here, it's important to eat balanced meals. More protein, good fats, complex carbs. Got to be physically active and adopt a healthy lifestyle. A bit of facts here. Weight gain, is it inevitable? Well, research shows that women gain around 1.5 pounds per year in their 40s and 50s. Now, weight is often a concern for women before, during, after. menopause. We just get obsessed by it, don't we? Excess body fat magnifies the risk, we know, of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and here again, it can aggravate hot flushes. So something to consider is muscle tissues burn more calories than fat. But we tend to start losing muscle during midlife, which then leads to a slower metabolic rate, making it easier to gain weight. So what you want to do, you want to eat more protein to build more muscle. Lift some heavy stuff. You don't have to do strength training if you don't want to, but just lift some heavy stuff. Another thing is we actually need less calories per decade. In fact, it's about 100 calories per decade. So if you're in your 40s, you should be eating about 200 calories less than you were when you were in your 20s. And the simple fact is because we are less active each decade. Now, of course, if you're running marathons and all that stuff, and you know what you got to eat a whole lot more. So declining estrogen levels also contribute to excess body fat. And this is because estrogen is stored in our fat cells. So that's a little bit of the extra weight that some women gain. And something I'd like to make a real good point about is that women, we come in all shapes and sizes. And it's the rare person who reflects the images we see on the fashion magazines, social media, etc. So please bear that in mind. The menopause diet. Menopause diet is really eating a healthy, balanced diet that includes foods which are rich in phytoestrogens. These could be things like tofu, soy, flax seeds, chickpeas, lentils, nuts and seeds, and lots of vegetables. It's similar to a Mediterranean diet. One thing I want you to think about is give yourself a midlife MOT. Unprocess your diet. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Eat more vegetables. Half your plate, that should just be vegetables because they are loaded with nutrients and minerals. Portion control. Are you still eating the same amount like you did 10 years ago? Well, maybe you shouldn't be. Portions and plates have gotten larger. Moderation here is key. Make better choices because we know, you know what you got to do. So instead of having a biscuit for a snack, have a piece of fruit and a few nuts. And I'd like to mention a little bit about caffeine because caffeine and alcohol, your coffees and your tea can exacerbate symptoms, interrupt your sleep, cause hot flushes. Take stock of how much you are consuming. Keep a food and symptom diary. Food is not bad or good. It's what you eat most of the time that matters. Healthy eating doesn't require perfection. The goal is better, more consistent eating plan that does your body good while including reasonable portions of food for fun. Think the 80-20 rule. And so I've talked about pulling it all together. I've talked about lifestyle, exercise, keeping a symptom diary, distressing, and focusing a lot on you. And then in terms of employers and managers, how to make life easier at work, it's about promoting the awareness of typical symptoms of menopause and the simple changes that can support women through the transition to all employees. Having the ability to talk honestly to a line manager about symptoms, don't suffer in silence. So because we know things like poor concentration, tiredness, poor memory, depression, feeling low, reduced confidence, sleep deprivation, and hot flushes are often cited as symptoms that can really take their toll in the workplace. So employers can support menopausal women as part of a holistic approach to employee health and well-being. Key point to remember, every woman's menopause is different. Some women have mild symptoms, other women endure symptoms for several years. Listen carefully to each woman and be prepared to tailor your support. And that brings me to whistle-stop tour of menopause and how it affects women.
Brilliant, Sabrina. That was really excellent. Lots of tips thrown in there. I'm sure everybody scribbled a lot of notes down about things that can be done differently. And I really like that advice you've just given about every woman is different and their experience will be different. So tailor your support. I think that's really, really key. Thank you, Sabrina. So if we can ask you to stop sharing your screen, Sabrina, and then we will ask Niamh if she would like to pop on her presentation, and we'll hand over to Niamh Kelly from the HR department, who is going to talk to us now from a HR perspective. Thank you, Niamh.
Thank you, guys, and hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm sure Karen will shout if you can't. So I'm Niamh Kelly from the HR Department Shropshire. I also cover Wrexham and Chester and Mid Wales, and I'm here to speak a little bit about employers and the law for menopause. And Sabrina has teed me up very nicely, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who was listening, ticking off all of the symptoms and going, can I never have a glass of wine again? And certainly what I took from Sabrina was everything in moderation. And I think that the whole point of this presentation is for us to help you, not only most of you who would be similar to ourselves in going through our menopause journey, but all of you as employers and supporters of colleagues who are going through the menopause. So my piece is around an employer's legal obligation. So the first thing is to say to you that the law is already there. It's covered in the Equality Act of 2010. Now, everybody has heard about the Equality Act of 2010 in lots of different guises. There's lots of different areas where you cannot discriminate on the grounds of age and gender and so on. But the three areas that specifically cover menopause are age, sex, so gender, not gender identity, but gender, so sex, and discrimination, of course. But there is a second piece of statutory elements that cover this, and that's the Health and Safety at Work Act of 1974. Now, everybody will be aware of the Health and Safety at Work Act, particularly in the areas that you cover, and mostly including COVID of last year, where we talked about safe working and people working in environments where infection control is absolutely paramount. But safe working also includes working conditions when experiencing menopause symptoms. The third area is the ACAS new, and there has to be a typo in somewhere, so it's ACAS new, not ACAS news. ACAS new codes of practice around flexible working. I'm going to talk about that in a moment in a little bit more detail. And of course, last but by no means least, whatever policy you might have in place yourselves. And I'm specifically going to talk about capability and performance management and being aware of menopausal symptoms when you are doing this. Okay, so just as a reminder about direct and indirect discrimination. So first of all, direct discrimination is an employee is treated less favourably because of a protected characteristic. And there's 9 protected characteristics, but the ones that we are specifically looking at here today are age and sex. Okay, so I am not employing you because you're a woman is direct discrimination. I am not giving you a bonus because you're a man is direct discrimination. So it directly links, the clue is in the title really, it directly links to a protected characteristic. But an indirect discrimination is a provision, practice or criteria where it's discriminatory in relation to a protected characteristic. So a very good example in the areas that you all work in is having all staff meetings on a Wednesday, for example, where you have a number of staff who don't work Wednesdays. That is indirect discrimination because by and large, statistically speaking, most people who work part-time are women. So you are indirectly discriminating against women by a work practice of having your all staff meeting on a Wednesday. So proportionately more women are not able to attend on that particular day. It's indirect discrimination. Now, there are a couple of interesting tribunal cases in relation to menopause. I want to go through them now with you because menopause itself is classified under the Act as being something that is a long-term adverse condition. Now, I'm very reluctant, I have to say, on a personal level, to use negative sounding terminology with menopause. As Sabrina so beautifully laid out for us, menopause is a fact of life. You know, it's not the end of a journey, it's sort of the middle of a journey, if you like. And she quite rightly says that, you know, the difference in longevity between Victorian times and now is that most of us will spend a third of our lives post-menopause. So, you know, I don't really want to use quite negative words when I'm talking about menopause, because that implies that it's a dreadful thing. It's a challenging thing, absolutely. And I say that as somebody who's a bit of a lived experience with it, but it's not the end of the world. So sometimes I want to clarify the language that I use, and I don't mean to sound overly negative when I talk about things like a long-term adverse effect, but those are the statements that are used in law. So theoretically, particularly under the Equality Act, someone who is having a long-term adverse effect from menopause can be considered as disabled in law. So having a look at this, we see that there are a number of cases that have popped up under Section 15 of the Equality Act because somebody is being treated unfavourably because of something that links to their disability. So let's have a look at the first one. Well, the first one is an interesting one because it is Merchant versus BT, British Telecom, whom as a large employer you would fairly think would know better, really. So Ms. Merchant was being performance managed for capability concerns. Now, here's the thing, BT used occupational health. They, when they had somebody who was suffering a long-term condition, and anybody who works with them in HR will know that the very first thing we say is, have you got an independent medical opinion to see if there's an underlying condition that may impact on their ability to do the job? So is there something there before you rush off into managing somebody, performance managing somebody and dismissing them on the grounds of capability? Stop, count to 10. Is there an underlying medical condition? So clearly somebody said that to the line manager in BT, and that's exactly what they did. And guess what? The occupational health report indicated that there were health issues due to menopause. So far, so good, you would think. But the manager decided that he had lived experience of menopause because his wife was going through the menopause, and Ms. Merchant was not exhibiting the same kind of symptoms as his wife was. And of course, the tribunal knocked that into touch and said that's nonsense, because it's crystal clear that every woman's menopause journey is completely different, and you can't take what you believe to be your own personal lived experience, and in this particular manager's case it was lived experience by proxy, but you can't take lived experience as against an independent medical report that said, guess what, there's an underlying medical condition that could actually give you some insight here. And as Sabrina listed a number of the known impacts that menopause has, including forgetfulness and so on, that could have easily explained the dip in her performance. And the other thing that was worth noticing here was that they failed to follow their own capability policy. So it wasn't just enough that there were the Equality Act and the Health and Safety at Work Act, but they themselves had a capability policy. So it'll come as no surprise to you to find that she was reinstated and given back pay and all the rest of it. So, you know, BT really fell foul here. This next one is just as important, and this is Musée versus Beaumarchais. And Beaumarchais had a male manager who started a name-calling campaign against A, who was going through the menopause. So she was being ridiculed, and some of the things that this manager encouraged other staff to do was to constantly label, or are you having a hot flush, are you having a hot moment, are you having a forgetful moment, it's because of your age, isn't it? And of course that instantly links back to direct discrimination. But what really brought it home was that there was a restructure and her post was unaffected, but others were encouraged to apply for her role. So she went off on stress, came back under occupational health with a recommendation for a phased return, and she was immediately put back on full shifts. So she resigned. Now, this is one of the few times that you're going to hear somebody in HR go, constructive dismissal was a real issue here. Because if somebody is dismissed and takes you to a tribunal for unfair dismissal, the onus is on the individual to prove that the company treated them unfairly, which is why HR is always banging on about a fair process. Constructive dismissal, which is what A claimed against Beaumarchais, constructive dismissal is where an individual resigns because they feel they have no option but to resign, that they were treated so badly that they had no option but to resign. And she won her case. She won £28,000. £10,000 was for loss of earnings, and £18,000, so more than the loss of earnings, was for injury to feelings. And injury to feelings doesn't have an upper limit. So you can be really caught out here. And the tip I want you to take away now from this is vicarious liability. Look at your own policies and vicarious liability. You are responsible for what your staff do. So that leads me nicely now on to top tips. So the first one, menopause policy, and Sabrina said this. Now, I know I'm in HR, I'm going to say have a policy, amn't I? But a policy, a non-contractual policy, is really a cultural statement. Now, the important thing about a cultural statement is it sets out your stall. It says, we understand about menopause. We want to help and support you. You have rights. We want to tell you about them. So there's a number of places that employers and employees can get information around the menopause. You should really, if you've got an intranet or a handbook or even just 2 sides of A4 policy, you can set out employees' rights and say, and where can you get some support? So menopausematters.co.uk provides information about the menopause symptoms and treatment options. So these are for you to signpost. What neither Sabrina nor I are suggesting is that employers have the responsibility to manage an individual's menopause. We're not saying that at all. What we're trying to say to you, though, is that you have a responsibility to try and support an individual who's going through menopause, bearing in mind every individual is different. The second one is the DAISY Network, and that's an excellent charity which provides support for people going through premature menopause. And as Sabrina says, that an awful lot of that is occurring now because it's something that you weren't really aware of 10 years ago. 10 years ago, when I was working in a large corporate environment, if I said the word menopause, nobody knew anything about it. And it certainly wasn't talked about widely, let alone perimenopause. So DAISY Network is an excellent charity that provides some information. And then the Menopause Cafe. I'm not aware that there is one in Shropshire, although I live to be proved wrong. I am aware that there's one in Chester, but you can certainly find out more. Menopause Cafe, providing information about events where people go to have cake, and as Sabrina says, fruit is also available, have a cup of tea and discuss the menopause. And of course, a number of you may very well have an employee assistance program or an EAP, so do signpost staff to that. Secondly, use occupational health to give you clinical advice. So again, HR will always say that before you rush into performance management, before you rush into saying there's a problem here, let's just make sure that the individual is getting the correct clinical advice. Because a lot of times, as Sabrina said, you're not sure if you're pre-menopause, menopausal, post-menopause, and you get different symptoms at different times, and everybody's symptoms are different. And so before you rush in to performance managing somebody, do consider getting occupational health to give you a bit of clinical advice. Because I've lost count of the number of times where occupational health have actually signposted individuals back to their GPs because they realise that the individual is in menopause and the individual themselves hasn't realised. They genuinely thought they were just stressed or basically having a nervous breakdown, didn't realise that clinically there was something affecting them. The next series of tips. So first of all, be aware of the working environment. Now, we hear this every year. There is a rule about you know, guidelines on temperatures when places are too cold. I can tell you now, as somebody who gets regular hot flushes, there's no such thing as a too cold workplace. And that's just me personally. But there can be such a thing as a too hot workplace for individuals, and it'll come as a surprise to you, there's actually no legal recommendation on the top temperature that you can work in. So a lot of people who are undergoing menopause symptoms will think it's desperately hot and everybody else thinks it's freezing. So here's something that I am particularly asking you to consider is flexibility about your dress code. And of course I do get infection control, and of course I do understand about the importance of branding and people wearing uniform. But just think twice. If your uniform currently is a synthetic fabric, so one of these things that you can just rush through the washing machine, hang up, drip dry, you never have to iron. If you're having a hot flush, I can honestly tell you that's the worst possible thing to wear. So if you currently are using a synthetic fabric, and I'm not talking just about the top, I'm also talking about the trousers or the dress, you might want to consider supporting people to have that in cotton instead. This next point, and I really can't emphasize this too much, and Sabrina said exactly the same thing, so you're getting at both barrels from both of us. Educate, educate, educate. Those of you on the call who have been, who are possibly roughly my age, so in menopause and still working in the last thirds of our working lives, will genuinely realize that 10 years ago, if you said menopause, absolutely nobody wanted to talk about that. And the difficulty is, if you have a cultural statement, that's fantastic, but if nobody knows about it, then I might as well have written something on the back of a receipt for you, because that's as much relevance as your cultural statement, your policy. So you actually have to do a bit of line manager training on the policy and the support. And please also bear in mind, not everybody wants to talk about their symptoms with their line manager, and particularly if their line manager is a different gender, it can be quite embarrassing to start talking about the fact that you keep needing to go to the toilet all the time, that you can't sleep, that you've got incontinence issues, and you're really just getting a hot flush every 5 minutes. Sometimes people just don't want to talk about that with their line manager of any gender. So please do try and consider menopause friends, and as I say, signpost people to where they can get support. And this second point is really important. Comments from other employees. Please do be careful of the provisions in the Equality Act on harassment, which is unwanted conduct related to a relevant protected characteristic that has the purpose or effect of violating a person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environments. And all of that is important, because think back to our Beaumarchais case, where the line manager, yes, was the instigator of it, but other colleagues also made all those comments about, oh, are you having a menopause moment? Are you having a hot flush? Is that why you can't remember something? You know, constantly people commenting on the way that this particular woman was suffering from menopause. And be aware that employers, of course, may be liable for the actions or comments of employees, the vicarious liability comment that I made earlier. The next thing, considering reasonable adjustments, flexible working. Now, working from home is part of flexible working, and I want to dispel a couple of myths out there, because up until last year, let's all be honest with each other, up until last year, flexible working was predominantly the preserve of people who were coming back from maternity leave and wanted to apply for flexible working because they wanted to manage their childcare. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that was one of the main reasons why the flexible working legislation came in. But Sabrina made a hugely valuable point quite early on in her presentation, that many of the people that we're talking about are part of the sandwich generation, which means that they've looked after their children and are now looking after their elderly parents or are a carer for another elderly person. And of course, flexible working is there for that reason as well. And it is not just about adjusting hours. Okay, so that is myth number 2. The first thing is it's not just about maternity leave, and the second thing is it's not just about adjusting hours. So people going down from full-time to part-time or whatever. It also encompasses a number of other areas, and that's why I mentioned the ACAS new guidance on flexible working, because it includes things like people asking for additional breaks, people asking to work from home. That's all part of flexible working. And of course, the right to request flexible working is a statutory right. That means it's a right in law. So if people are asking about additional breaks, I'd like to have additional breaks, I'd like to work 1 day from home, they're asking under the flexible working regulations, which means you must consider it properly. You can't just say, well, it really doesn't suit us. You've got to properly consider this and give them the right of appeal. So please don't get caught out, because I'm speaking to a client at the moment who said, well, it just doesn't suit me. And I said, well, what have you done? Have you asked them for a meeting? Have you had a chat with them? No, well, I've just told them they can't have it. And I said, okay, so we need to write to them and offer them the right of appeal. But why? And I have to fall back on HR's age-old statement, which is because that's what the law is. So please be careful about flexible working, because flexible working could be a reasonable adjustment. So finally, what is happening next? Well, very excitingly, the MP for Swansea, Carolyn Harris, has brought forward a private bill called Menopause Support and Services Bill. And very excitingly, it's got its second reading on the 29th of October. And it's got all party support. So it is a bill that has really caught fire in Parliament. And to be fair, I think it makes a change from coronavirus. It's nice to see something that is quite supportive. So there are a number of things that they're looking at. The first is HRT in England is not exempt from prescription charges, which is a real shock to me, because it is exempt in Wales and Scotland. So one of the things that this bill is bringing in is an exemption from prescription charges for HRT in England, bringing it in line with Wales and Scotland. And they are particularly looking at menopause rights, entitlements and education. And to ensure that the bill gets all-party buy-in, Carolyn Harris is chairing an all-party parliamentary group on menopause, and they're leading an inquiry into workplace policies, public health messaging, education, and I think most excitingly, medical school training, because it's very well known that the things that medical schools consider women's issues really don't get as much excitement and press as other areas of public health education. So I think that this is a really exciting development. And as I say, it's one of the best supported private members' bills in a number of years. And she actually had to turn down people from joining the all-party parliamentary group because she had too many applications. So I think that that's a real sign that politicians are finally getting the message about women's rights or everybody's rights. So I think that that's an exciting thing. So finally, that's it from me. If there are any questions, there's all our contact details. But to be scrupulously fair, I have a nice, easy and unusual name, a bit like Sabrina, so it's going to be relatively easy to find us on social media. So I'll stop the presentation, Karen, and hand back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Niamh. That was really a very, very comprehensive discussion about the issues from an employment point of view. And I really like the fact that a lot of the things that you talked about had a real crossover in terms of education, and the fact that you talked about vicarious liability, which I think is very important for people to be aware of from an employment point of view. Most excitingly, though, is the information coming through about the private members bill and the all-party group around that, looking at medical school training, which I think, judging by a lot of the information that we've heard, is very much needed. So, Niamh, that was really comprehensive and really, really followed on well from Sabrina. So thank you very much.